Have you ever stopped to wonder where this whole idea of a stolen election really comes from? I mean, it feels so present, so much a part of our world right now, but its roots, they go way, way deeper. So today, we're going to trace the history of this really powerful narrative from the 19th century all the way up to today.
Just listen to this quote from 2026. It's intense, right? It's direct, and it perfectly sets the stage for the conversation we're about to have. This isn't just some political catchphrase. It's a call to action, and it has a long, really complicated history that we're about to unpack together.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to kick things off with that 2026 event that got this whole conversation started. Then we'll trace the myth's more recent history before jumping way back to a pretty shocking coup in the 1890s. From there, we'll zoom back to the present, look at the actual data versus the claims, try to understand the strategy behind it all, and figure out what it means for the future. All right, let's dive right into our first section, a call to action. This all kicks off with one single, really surprising election result in 2026 that set off a pretty extreme reaction. Okay, so it all started with a special election down in Texas. A Democrat won a state Senate seat that had been Republican for decades, and we're not talking a squeaker here. It was a massive 32-point swing from the 2024 presidential results in that same district. A result like that, that's stunning. It definitely put the political world on high alert.
And the reaction? It was immediate and pretty extreme. The president at the time, Donald Trump, called for a federal takeover of the polls. His allies, Steve Bannon, took it a step further, vowing to have Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, surround polling places. Now notice the key thing here. A surprise election loss wasn't just seen as a shift in voter opinion. Nope, it was instantly framed as a crisis that required a huge show of federal force.
And that brings us to Section 2, the myth's recent history. Because, this kind of talk didn't just pop up out of nowhere. To really get what happened in 2026, we've got to rewind the clock a few decades.
This timeline is pretty fascinating because it shows you how this narrative was built piece by piece. It starts back in 1993 with the Motor Voter Act, which just made it easier for people to register. Right after that, in '94, some losing Republicans started blaming voter fraud from undocumented immigrants. This led to year-long investigations in 1996 which, and this is crucial, found nothing. But the accusation itself was enough to plant the idea of fraud. Then you fast forward to 2016, and the slogan "Stop the Steal" is officially born.
And this just lays out the modern playbook perfectly. You have then House Speaker Mike Johnson making this really dramatic claim about leads magically disappearing. He makes it sound incredibly suspicious. But then, almost in the same breath, he adds the key caveat. Can I prove that? No. This tactic, making a really powerful accusation while admitting you have zero proof, has become a classic move.
Okay, on to Section 3. To truly get where this strategy comes from, we have to go way back. We're talking 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina, for an event that is a really chilling historical blueprint for all of this. So back in the 1890s in North Carolina, you had the rise of this thing called the Fusion Movement. It was this incredible biracial coalition of white populists and black Republicans. They came together over shared economic goals and, importantly, protecting voting rights. And you know what? They were successful. They actually won control of the state government in 1896. They were a legitimate, elected, governing body.
But the established Democratic Party fought back with a brutal white supremacy campaign in 1898. They used threats to keep black voters away from the polls and just tampered with the results when that didn't work. But what happened in Wilmington, that was on another level. The city had a successful biracial government that wasn't even on the ballot that year. So 2,000 armed men staged a coup, the only successful one in U.S. history, and they violently overthrew a legally elected American government.
Now, what's really telling here is how explicit they were about their motivation. The coup leaders literally issued a white declaration of independence. They didn't even try to hide their reasons. It wasn't about policy or anything like that. It was plain as day about race and a flat-out refusal to accept being governed by black Americans. Which brings us right back to the present and to Section 4, data versus the narrative. Let's fast forward and actually fact-check the central claim that fuels this entire modern story, this idea that millions of non-citizens are voting illegally.
So here's the specific claim that was made after the 2016 election, that millions of illegal votes were cast and that they completely changed the popular vote outcome. It's a huge, dramatic number that really suggests a crisis, right? So what does the evidence actually say?
Well, the evidence says this, 0.00001%. That's not a typo. A study by the Brennan Center looked at 23.5 million votes in the very areas with the highest non-citizen populations, and the rate of suspected non-citizen votes was that tiny, tiny fraction. This visual just perfectly shows the massive canyon between the narrative of millions and the actual statistical reality.
So let's just break down how they even got to that tiny number. The study surveyed 42 different jurisdictions. Get this, 40 out of 42 reported 0 instances of non-citizen voting. The other 2, they referred a grand total of about 30 instances for review. Let that sink in for a second. 30 potential issues out of 23.5 million votes. The data just doesn't show a widespread problem.
So you're probably asking, if the facts don't back it up, then what's the point? Well, that brings us to Section 5, a strategy of legitimacy. It's all about the why behind this myth. At its core, the political strategy is to frame the other side's voters as fundamentally illegitimate. See, if you can convince your own supporters that the other side's votes just don't count or shouldn't count, then you've laid the perfect groundwork to reject any election you lose. It's like a preemptive strike on the whole democratic process.
And this table just draws a stark parallel. In 1898, they rejected a fairly elected government, claiming black officials were unfit to rule. Today, the narrative rejects election results by claiming Democratic voters are illegitimate. In both cases, the argument is basically that a certain group of people simply does not have the right to govern. It's the same strategy, different century.
And this wasn't just a political strategy, it became a cultural one. The real history of the Wilmington coup was completely rewritten. Books, and most famously, the 1915 blockbuster film The Birth of a Nation, portrayed the coup not as a violent overthrow of democracy, but as a heroic act of salvation. And that narrative was incredibly powerful and shaped American culture for generations.
And that brings us to our final section, past, present, and future. Let's connect all these threads and really think about what they mean for what's ahead. So let's just be crystal clear on what we're talking about. Stop the Steal is a narrative. It's a prepackaged belief system that says for your side, a loss can only be explained by cheating and fraud from illegitimate sources. It's an argument that basically makes losing impossible by definition.
But while there are definitely echoes of the past, there are also some crucial differences. In 1898, that declaration came after the coup had already succeeded. Today, it comes before the election, which suggests it's a strategy to rally supporters and maybe intimidate opponents. And maybe most importantly, the world is just different. In 1898, it was really hard to organize resistance. Today, millions can be forewarned and mobilized in an instant.
Which leaves us with this final, really essential question. This playbook is over a century old. It was designed for a totally different time and a much smaller scale. So can a strategy that worked to overthrow one city government in an era of limited information possibly succeed in a modern, connected, and forewarned nation of hundreds of millions? That really is the question history is asking all of us right now.